Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our halfway mark session, number 3 today, where the theme is going local. We have 2 speakers today, Councillor Jinty MacTavish, whom you all know or know of, although she tells me she's not speaking as a councillor, and I think that's probably a clarification that might be advisable. Second speaker is Scott Willis of the Blueskin Bay Resilient Communities Trust, and we'll hear a little more about that move a little later on. Just in terms of the housekeeping, Scott is going to speak first and will take us through to our tea break around 3 o'clock. Jinty will follow up at that point, and there will be time for a collective questions just a bit before 4 o'clock, so we've got 15 to 20 minutes for that activity. However, the detailed introduction today is from another SCAN representative, so I've great pleasure in calling on Monica Clark-Grill to come and do the honours in that regard. Monica.
So welcome, nice that you're all here. So I'm wanting to introduce both our speakers today. First of all, starting with Jinty MacTavish. Jinty, can you just stand up for a minute? This is Jinty. Thank you. Jinty is a full-time councillor since she was elected in 2010, so quite a while, and her focus is on promoting open and participatory democracy is her aim, and she aims for evidence-based decision-making. She wants to get greater links going with the Dunedin tertiary education, tertiary institutions, and she's keen to get investments and policies that will make Dunedin communities more sustainable, resilient, and connected. So this is Jinty's aims as a city councillor. And during her first term in council, she participated in a global pilot program for young elected members interested in sustainability. This was a very important network, and she's still drawing inspiration from that network. But before she was elected, she completed a Bachelor of Science, and she did a Master's in Science Communication here at the Otago University. And Jinty also worked with Enviro schools and volunteered time with Sustainable Dunedin City and with 350 Aotearoa. So that's a little summing up of what Jinty brings, and I'm looking forward to your talk, Jinty. But we're going to start with Scott Willis. Scott is the manager, as you've heard, of Blueskin Resilient Community Trust. And Scott's journey started in that direction, started when he completed an MA in social anthropology in 2002 on the so-called chestnut economy, which was looking at neo-peasantry in France. And that involved 2 years of ethnographic research and participation in the informal rural economy. So it was a very interesting backdrop and a lot of experience he gained from that part. But then he returned to New Zealand to raise his children here and ended up in the community, the Blueskin community. And then in 2006, the flooding in Waitati was a catalyst that led him to organize a community visioning exercise, which brought many new ideas and directions, which some of which was the Waitati Edible Gardeners group, and he is a co-founder of that. He helped establish the Blueskin Resilient Community Trust in 2008. And now as a trust manager, he has to deal with all the challenges that navigating a small NGO brings, which are quite a few. And since 2009, his main work has been project management of the Blueskin wind farm development. And Scott is also a director on the board of the Otago Chamber of Commerce and a trustee on the Cozy Homes Charitable Trust, so many strings to his bow. Scott says he is very passionate about community and collaborative effort, and keen to confront the great challenge of climate change with all people together. So can I invite Scott up here? Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I did have an idea that I'd bring a whole lot of nice pictures of the chestnut economy, but there's so much to talk about, and I thought actually what is important is to start with the big picture. So I'm actually going to dip back into some lecturing and background. So forgive me, I'm going to whip through it, and we can talk about things later. But what I really want to start with is that we used to live in using a somatic energy regime. Somatic energy is muscle energy. It's the energy that comes from employment of our bodily power or the power of animals. Everything comes from the sun ultimately, but for most of human history we've used our bodies or the bodies of horses, bullocks, to convert the sun's energy into energy for use for all the activities that humans have needed. And settled agriculture about 12,000 years ago changed that system by allowing us to generate some surplus and build hierarchies and employ some of our creative intelligence in developing new systems and enslaving other people to build surplus of energy. That's where politics come from. And of course, the somatic energy regime has a real fragility in that when disease runs through a population, when people are too disenfranchised or downtrodden, they can rise up. And so an energy slave of a humankind can be a problematic energy source. We're going to skip through quite a few years here and move on to this great big step change, the Industrial Revolution. So we've jumped from the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago, approximately, up until the Industrial Revolution just a couple of hundred years ago. And that revolution was a combination of revolutions, really. It was a combination of agricultural food and a particularly warm period in Britain, a revolution in terms of energy, a move away from the somatic energy regime towards a fossil fuel energy regime, a revolution in terms of economic organisation, and that was particularly the political situation in Britain with a weak monarchy and a powerful merchant class and religious elements that, and changing to tea and coffee rather than gin shops. Quite helpful when you want to employ the brain for some activity. And a revolution in transportation, so a move away from the horse and cart and mud tracks, building of roads or rebuilding of Roman roads, use of canals and the train. So it all began in Britain, and it spread from the core of Britain to other regions. There was a rapid dissemination along cultural pathways. What that really means is that the expansion in Britain and the froth in cities is causing a population boom. Maybe I'm jumping ahead of my slides here, but there were also a number of ructions within agricultural society that was industrialising and that led to expansion out into settler states. The settler states being the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all those places where instead of human dispersal, which has happened incrementally in all previous history, moving from one landmass to another, all of a sudden people jumped across great bodies of water and across other countries or around other countries in big numbers and brought with them a very different way of doing things. And that created great disparity between regions, and it led to the development of a global network, strongly integrated market relations. So that's where we have the East India Company bringing in tea, selling opium into China, bringing in tea to feed the working class in Britain. And all of that, the slums of London, Manchester, etc., set in place a population boom. And of course, people have to eat. I like this picture. This is what London was like. It was an agricultural city with animals driven into the heart of the city to be slaughtered. And it was quite acceptable. In fact, it was desirable for Victorian women to go and get a top up, a nice glass of blood for a refreshing and a refreshing tonic. We weren't so alienated from our food back then. So in 1750, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, roughly the start of the Industrial Revolution, British population was 5.7 million. So it was similar in population size during the Roman period and around 13 AD and in 1650. So you can see there's a sort of a stability of population, a rise and fall, like all animal populations in a reasonably stable ecology. There's disease will trim out a few from time to time, and it'll rise back up to a certain level. Agriculture presented a limit to population growth, and the organisation of society, of agricultural society, presented a limit to population growth. But by 1850, the population of Britain had grown to 16.6 million. We're doing a real romp here through history. What happened? What happened was the Anthropocene. There's a lot of debate about when actually the Anthropocene started. Some people argue it did start way back at the birth of agriculture, close to 12,000 years ago, or that it started with the Industrial Revolution. So this is sort of a catch-up slide, if you like, reinforcing the idea that we have made a significant movement from muscle power with some mechanical kinetic energy, water currents and wind, and energy from biomass, so, wood-burning stoves. We've made a significant and earth-changing transition to employing fossil fuels. So the Anthropocene is really about the human impact on land use, on ecosystems, on biodiversity, creating species extinction, and it's the foundation, the piles of our civilization. One of the things that Joseph Tainter talks about, he's a famous anthropologist I like, is the collapse of complex civilizations. And one truth that he mentions is that civilizations always collapse. Not a happy thought. Here we go, here's a steam engine. So what happened through that transition was that we got rid of somatic energy regime. We got rid of slaves or low-paid wage earners, labourers, and started employing energy slaves. So in 1800, one steam engine could equal 200 workers. That means we've freed up people to do a whole lot of other things because we've got power. In 1900, one steam engine could equal 6,000 workers. So an improvement in technology is freeing up human creativity and human activity for other purposes, for creating pots and pans and consumer items, some of which were very needed, some of which were not, but creating a consumer or beginning a consumer society. And fossil fuels brought with them a mobile, flexible energy source. So you don't have to feed a bucket full of coal. You don't have to worry about it rising up in revolt. You just need to burn it in an efficient engine. So, prior to the Industrial Revolution, people in societies around the world lived overwhelmingly in rural and agricultural context. economic life was pretty basic. Metal wasn't widespread. Most people got all their living requirements within their area. And manufacturing was highly decentralized, artisanal or guild-based manufacturing. Most people didn't travel very far. Actually, I heard a great story many years ago with a friend who ran out of petrol somewhere in the mid-US, and he walked along to a farmhouse and said, "I seem to have run out of gas." And the guy said, "Well, that's a mighty strange accent you got there. Where are you from?" And he said, "Well, I'm from Europe." He said, "Europe?" "Oh, no." He said, "I'm from England." He said, "England? Where's that?" I said, "Well, it's part of Europe." And he said, "Oh, yeah, Europe. Yeah, I heard of that. That's the other side of independence," which was a town 60 kilometres away, miles away. So some things never change. We often think about our rural space, and we're reasonably complacent, I'd argue, in New Zealand, as a rather idyllic, bucolic space with, this is not a New Zealand picture, by the way, it's a US picture, but a place where nice things happen, where life is good, if we don't think too much about dairy, and people are happy. Our environment provides us with regular, stable supply of food, neatly packaged. We can find it in the supermarket. We can hunt it off the supermarket shelves, spear it down when it tries to escape the freezers. And yes, there are some downsides, but they're usually tidily packaged away, not so difficult to overlook. And of course, there are some wastelands or some lands that do produce food, but in ways that we'd rather not think about. So we don't quite know what's in our food anymore. We know sometimes there are things in there that shouldn't be, but we don't look too closely. Who looks at where the palm oil in their biscuits comes from? We know most of it comes from Indonesia through cutting down rainforests, but we don't know about the pesticides or the cocktail effects of our foods. Our environment is picking up these signals. Our environment is picking up lots of signs of the disruption that we're creating through our food systems, our energy-intensive food systems, and other parts of the world, the parts that are invisible to us, are also picking up the signs of our food systems and our distance from where our food comes from. So 5 key changes that were caused by the Industrial Revolution. We've got a changing productivity of agriculture. First, there was extensification, that move out from the core to the settler states, and then post-World War II, a redeployment of chemical industries, of the tanks to tractors, to give a resurgence in productivity, an end to rural society. The world now is mostly urban, just mostly urban. The rise of the industrial city, and if anybody Googles Los Angeles, you'll see what I mean. Industrial cities that can only survive with massive importation of energy, of food, of water, and essentially concrete jungles. And development of a new model of industrial agriculture. And we can see that in New Zealand when we look at the dairy expansion, and while it's still mostly grass-fed, it is done at using an industrial model, and at an industrial cost to our environment. So we are seeing quite significant environmental impacts from industrial agriculture. And all of that leads to a world at which risk has become central, increased risk. We're no longer a few million, we're quite a significant number of billions in the world. And the impact that we have on our environment is now having an impact on us. This is the road to Doctor's Point in 2006. So climate change is now here. After 12,000 years of relatively stable environment, we have changed things. Changed things in ways that we don't understand and we can't fully comprehend because we live short lives. And climate change is change on a planetary scale. But what that means is we have ended a stable climate and we have ended stable coastlines. So we know now that with the emissions that we've already put out, sea level rise locked in within this century. We've locked in a metre sea level rise. We don't know how many more years it will go. We don't know how far it will go. We don't know much, except that things are now changing. We have moved into a significantly different environment. So now I get to talk about the good stuff. That's all the difficult side of things, and it's disturbing and worrying, and I think that's an important part of our job now, is to consider the real problems and to look them in the face and then start looking at how we can confront them and deal with issues. So I want to step back to 2006, where we had flooding in Waitati. We sat down later that year and did a visioning process in the community. This is still, this is a little bit of an update on that process, but it is still very relevant to what came out of that. So we know that peak oil is real. We know that there are limits to the amount of fossil fuels that we can extract. What we do also know is that peak oil hasn't been catastrophic. There has been an uptake or an increased development of renewable energy forms, and there's been an extraction of dirty fossil fuels, shale gas, etc., which has kept price relatively stable. Actually, we shouldn't say that. Oil price goes up and down all over the place, but it hasn't shot up to such an extent that it's caused the collapse of our economies yet. But the problem with that is that it is causing our climate, it is creating far greater climate impact. And brown tech, the technological exploration of dirty technologies, is certainly here and now. We've just seen our government has given $10 million over the next 4 years for oil exploration off New Zealand. I've been at a conference where Simon Bridges told the Wind Industry Association that the Wind Industry Association, wind development in New Zealand, needed to stand on its own 2 feet and shouldn't expect any form of subsidies, because what sort of business would it be if it depended on government handouts? So we're entering, because of these external factors, we are entering a world with greater economic volatility and great uncertainty. And that really does raise the question, is a transition, an orderly transition to a low carbon economy even possible now? We're seeing the funnel being restricted. We have a very small window of opportunity. So this is a diagram from a sketch, a workshop sketch from a 2009 workshop, a follow-up workshop, and you can see, there are things like street parties. We've got technology, texting, public meetings, website, happy people, local businesses, employment, energy. Is that a turbine down there? I think it is. Yeah. Transport, cycleways. Yay, City Council. A lot of community desire has gone into setting this, and I heard a great term at the Public Health Association recently. It's called eco-acupuncture, and I realised that's what we've been doing. It was setting a vision for what we wanted things to be like, and then backcasting to look at those action points that where we could take action to make a difference. And this is really what we'd call the politics of enough, trying to live within our means. So now I'm going to put my BRCT hat on fully here and talk about our focus at the Blueskin Resilient Communities Trust, where we're working on community, because it's no good building a bunker and buying ammunition. We are social animals, we live together, and we are secure and safe when we're supporting each other. It's working on food, because we can't do much without food. It's working on energy, because energy is our great Achilles heel. And now we also have to work on adaptation as well as mitigation. We have to work solidly on climate action. So on community, this is a photo from the grassroots gig on Saturday night. We had a great MC and a band out at Long Beach Hall. And that was a fantastic community event. Not just 3 bands, but a lot of discussion, useful and curious auction. Mr. Stephen Packer donated a vasectomy, which was, we only had 1 bidder. Other useful things. There is a great sense of community out in Blueskin. However, not just in Blueskin Bay, but in the whole community sector, there is a restriction on community sector resourcing and an increasing demand as government services retract. So the community sector is now dealing with an increasing range and complexity of issues. There's also, it's often seen as the second or third tiered sector. It's, because it's community, it's not so important. Why do you need money? Why do you, haven't you got volunteers to do things? Don't people just want to give up? Can't they do that whenever? And that is possible. Certainly a lot of people do volunteer for community organisations, but it's not done in such a way that you can't fire a volunteer for not turning up. You can't fire a volunteer for not putting in the accounts properly. Those things just don't work. So there's a sort of limit of professionalism that you can achieve through that structure. And that puts a great pressure on systems and structure. And increasingly, in our society, there are people who are under great time pressure or time poverty. They suffer from time poverty. They may be wealthy enough, but they are so busy putting money on the table, keeping the family fed, dealing with after-school things that they haven't got time anymore to donate to community organisations. Gone are the days where one person worked, the other person was at home, and the person started at the start of the day and finished at 5. That doesn't happen anymore. And really what we're addressing here is a failure of the market, because most of the activities that we work on are about lowering consumption, reducing demand. You don't make money from doing that. You just build a better place to live. So, food. food is one of the things that really started us out. The wedgies were born in 2006. There's a community garden. There's a gardening column. There's now a number of different venues and informal cooperatives for raw milk, biograins, cheese, all of those activities that sort of function a little bit below the out of line of sight, but keep people nourished. So there's a lot happening in terms of food, but, there's a lot of information on this slide. We have a long way to go if we want to build resilience in our community. Our area requires about 2,000 tonnes of food annually and produces just under 2,000 tonnes annually, but that's mainly meat. So unless we shift to a fully meat-based diet, we're short of some quite essential nutrients, calories. Fertile river plain that many houses are now on is a great climate risk. It's that conjunction of an alluvial fan as sea level rises, and we have seen a number of high water events in recent years. Some good news, quite a number of households are producing food, but none are completely self-sufficient. So this is very clearly a very different scenario to the pre-industrial world where most households were self-sufficient or traded for the one or two food items they couldn't produce. However, the last two bullet points are really the positive signs that, most people surveyed in our food report believe it's important to know where food comes from and want to support local food initiatives. So there's a strong desire there, but it's a change in food culture that we need to create. It's very hard to shift from coming into town, working in your job, dropping it at New World or Countdown, picking up your groceries in plastic bags, driving home, sticking them in the fridge in the cupboard. It's quite a different task to go around all the local producers and to get into your garden and to kill a chook. Those are different tasks, and lots of people don't like doing them anymore. They've lost knowledge of how to do it and have lost skill in how to do it. Energy is the big area that I work in. This is a mock-up. This is not a real wind farm yet. And if I wasn't here today, I'd be finishing off resource consent for our wind farm development. But this is the major project. This is where I think we've got lots of positive news. We're working on building a small wind farm which will generate more than the total electricity demand for our end-of-the-grid community. Our total electricity demand is 5.6 gigawatt hours annually, and we're looking at building a wind farm that will generate 6.4 gigawatt hours annually. That's not without issues. It's challenging to build a small wind farm in New Zealand. I would like Simon Bridges to give us a little slice of the 10 million he's giving to the fossil fuel sector, but we can do it without that, and look out for publication of the resource consent in the coming couple of months. Cosy Homes is now a charitable trust that's a city-wide project to ensure that every Dunedin home is warm and cosy by 2025. Solar uptake in Blueskin Bay, since we've been doing the energy work, Blueskin area, the Waitati substation, represents 6% of Otago Net's network connections, but it represents 76% of the distributed generation capacity within Otago Net's network. So a very small percentage of connections, the greatest majority of distributed generation within that small area. That means that we have the capacity, we've built a number of small power stations, that's solar panels on their roof, even in this low solar environment. That means that we are getting there towards a more resilient community. EVs and e-bikes are now the fashion, and I can see everybody here on an e-bike. They're good fun things to ride on. They make the hills disappear. We are working on getting a fast charging station into Dunedin before Christmas. And BRCT does a number of things in relation to energy. We do home performance assessments where an objective assessor comes into a home and does an evaluation, an assessment, and a series of recommendations. We are now providing insulation for people who want to put in insulation themselves. We're not doing a full insulation service, and we're also facilitating truckloads of firewood. Now, this is an interesting project because we don't deliver loads of cut firewood. We simply ask people to get together, find a place where they can have 25 tonnes of logs dumped, and then they've got to work together to ring it up and split it. And our purpose in that is not just to provide affordable firewood to help limit fuel poverty, it's also to encourage people to work together and support each other. And of course, climate action, oh look, this is from the recent Public Health Association conference where we provided carbon management, and we've also been working on adaptation planning, and all our projects really are about mitigating emissions. But climate action is incredibly difficult in New Zealand because apparently our government believes that we're doing enough. We don't need to worry. We've just sent a climate refugee back to Pacific Islands. From our perspective, we're moving way too slow. We're not putting anywhere near enough resource to it, and we're battling complacency in our community as well, to a certain extent. So this is a diagram from David Holgram, and it sort of thinks about where we can act. So thinking about the household level, there's a lot of things we can do at our local level. In our local community, and hopefully at local government level, we can take an approach that is much more responsive to the community need, but also being aware of the environmental limits. And as we get larger, the city-state, we see that integration with global finance, etc., which doesn't want to give up on the capitalist project just yet, so is looking for the green tech saviour, which might be there. But ultimately, what we're also talking about here is that much of our financial system is predicated on economic growth, which is a ridiculous concept in a full world with hard environmental limits. That's simply a list of BRCT values that guide us in our journey. And I think investing for the future is one of the most significant things that we're working on. And this is preparing for our wind farm development, but I like this image because it also is a hopeful one of looking out at what else needs to be done. And it's about productive and useful action. So there are 3 priorities that I've wanted to highlight here. We need now to focus on developing more food and greater food diversity from the same land that we're currently using without harming the supply of environmental services. So without creating further environmental damage and probably restoring some of the damage that's been created. We need to ensure a rapid transition to renewable forms of energy, and again without harming the environment. And this is a relatively simple task. Jeremy Rifkin talks about the third industrial revolution, where we have decentralized renewable generation. And finally, the greatest challenge possibly is rebuilding an economy based on well-being. And there's a great book by Paul Dalziel and Carolyn Saunders on social well-being from the Bridget Irving series at the UBS, which I'd thoroughly recommend everyone goes to have a look. Thank you very much.